I'm here to greet the vinyl community, read out a chapter called The Tex Watson Murders. Question: did he act crazy? Answer: just when I saw him stabbing. Was that pretty crazy? Linda Kasabian testifying about Tex Watson during his 1971 trial. Aside from the sheer impossibility of unraveling all of the lies, another major part of the problem we face is the misleading labels most commonly slapped on the complicated spectacle of 69 classifying the series of crimes as the Manson murders or the Sharon Tate murders, placing Manson and Tate at the center of a multifarious web of often unrelated incidents and interpersonal conflicts unrelated to either of them. If these murders belong to any one individual, it isn't the flamboyant, photogenic weirdo Charlie Manson, but the strangely ignored chief culprit, the bland and thoroughly unremarkable Charles Watson. Despite setting the nightmare in motion by ripping off Bernard Crowe, almost doing all to the actual killing at Cielo and Waverly, the delivering of death blow to Shorty Shea, a crime he wasn't even charged with, Watson is almost entirely airbrushed from the picture. If he exits at all of the public imagination, he is simply the blindless hand puppet of the supposed master Manson, never an autonomous individual responsible for his own actions. Consequently, Watson's own independent associations with the underworld, quite independent of his association with Manson, was almost completely ignored. Sharon Tate's relatively minor celebrity at the time gave the media a handy name for the crimes before an arrest was made, but she was simply an innocent bystander. While it's increasingly clear that others' animosities also fueled the violence, her husband's friend Wojciech Wachowski and her on-again, off-again lover Jay Sebring were the primary targets. This is no secret either. Until the sudden universal amnesia that descended upon December 69 with Manson's emergence as the chief suspect, as seen in the newspaper account cited earlier, Wachowski in particular have been widely reported by the mainstream press as a likely target of a drug burn retaliation. But studio glamour shots capturing the young actress's beauty sold more newspapers than Wojciech Wachowski's rather thuggish mug would. So Tate's face was become the icon the media uses as a pictograph for the crimes. With all the eyes on the daily freak show of the theatrical archfiend Manson and the girls during the hyper-publicized trial, the masses barely noticed the later low-key trial of mild-mannered murderer Charlie Watson. While Watson was extradited to California from a cozy family-catered cell in Texas, too late to include among the defendants, Bugliosi's decision not even to call the main man guilty of all the murders as a witness during the Manson trial speaks volumes about the DA's agenda. Ask yourself how many who could really identify Tate and Manson would even recognize the names of Wachowski and Watson. That's why the nomenclature presents such an obstacle to understanding, but it's Hollywood's procedure to grant top billing to the biggest names. Much of the real story concerns people whose names few ever heard, lives lived in the shadows of the underworld, never intended for public consumption. At the opposite extreme, other players involved in the intricate causes and conditions of the crimes and the cover-up thereafter were much admired household names. So admired were they that the prospect of their real lives being exposed that they risked perjury, tampering with and withholding evidence to protect their public images and careers. Previous literature on the subject tells and retells the standard tales about the more widely known characters in the horrid happening and nauseum. In order to penetrate depths of previously unsounded, we devote our attention here to malefactors whose connection to the crimes and their cover-ups were rarely touched upon in earlier chronicles. The colorful antics of Charlie's communal tribe were endlessly fascinated to the voyeuristic, straight public living vicariously through the long-ago exploits of the damaged free spirits. but all the attention paid to the spectacle distracts from the part of the story that always gets excised: the criminal activity and interaction of the Hollywood elite and Charles Watson. Another chapter here is called Hypno a Go-Go. Like the go-go dancers, like Susan Atkins. But this is called Hypno a Go-Go. Chuck Sommers hits the strip. Does anybody know that Charlie Manson had a AKA? I didn't, but now I do. He had an AKA known as Chuck Sommers. He actually had a job. We're going to read about it. Most unusual Spawn commune suspect repeatedly interviewed in search of insight about these crimes are singularly clueless about the true nature of the murders. That's because many of the slippies were kept in the dark about long-standing but separate organized crime connections Charles Watson and Charles Manson maintained. Many of Manson's underworld associations reached back to the early 1950s, as far back as the time as a stable boy at a mob racetrack. Young Charlie was wheeling and dealing with thugs in Wheeling, West Virginia. Whether behind bars or during the rare stints of freedom, he made a point of cultivating outlaws and desperados from Kentucky to Acapulco. In his final years of freedom in freaky LA, Crazy Cat Charlie lived at least 9 other lives away from the flock of hippie chicks. Under the nom de crime Chuck Sommers, he stayed in touch with a rogues gallery of ex-cons he believed during his long tour of the prison system, few of whom ever crossed paths with the groovy Gardner, which would be Watson, and the wizard, meaning Charlie, persona to turn on for the young loves and the music crowd. In the very brief time between walking out of Terminal Island on March 67 and being escorted in handcuffs into the Inyo County Jail in October 69, Charlie developed an astonishing large network of scoundrels, some of whom were still in the scams he ran from maximum security prisons well into his old age. Away from Santa Susana's rural idyll, Charlie consorted with the squalid urban criminal element doing thriving business at a string of Hollywood nightclubs. Chuck Sommers, we know who that is now, cut a swath through the omnibus, the Melody Room, and the Sea Witch. Those are different names of clubs. A tiny nautical-themed dive featuring a richer, witchy female figurehead from the ship as alluring outer decor, the Sea Witch, was dry docked right next door to Dino's, meaning Dino Martin, Dino's Lodge, a swanker joint operated by Charlie's occasional cocaine client, Dean Martin. Even before George Spahn named him Tex, as he doesn't like to be called Tex, we should call him Charles. Even before George Spahn named him Tex, Charles Watson was also on board with the scurvy crew at the Sea Witch. Back then, he was still a clean-cut mod dope dealer selling his wares on the strip. In 2013, Charlie told me that when he took a welcome break from the overseeing his unruly children on the ranch, he was especially fond of the Galaxy Club, a true dealing den that offered dinner and dancing at 8923 Sunset Boulevard, just a snort and a puff away from the lucrative dope market of youngsters doing their thing at the mobster-owned Whiskey A Go-Go. He fondly recalled the Galaxy featuring scantily clad go-go dancers dancing until 2 a.m. in the morning and upon upstairs after hours orgy pad, received for all-night fucking and sucking, where he was a privileged guest, a prisoner's paradise. In Charlie's words, during this same 2013 conversation, Charlie said that one of the closest friendships he cultivated on those solo jaunts was the Galaxy's eccentric proprietor, Bill Denyer, Deanyer. This is a character, this guy, Bill. A professional stage hypnotist, Denyer shared Charlie's abiding fascination with hypnosis, the power of mind over matter, and the development of psychic powers. Charlie learned that Denyer was born in the same year he was in his kin's Kentucky homeland, He even lived in his old stomping ground of Wheeling, Virginia, West Virginia. Charlie took these steps from the coincidence cosmos seriously as positive omens. Denier affected a mysterious image in his stage act, but outwardly professed to be a strict believer in the scientific study of hypnotic arts. Charlie told me his discussion with Denier centered on how to expand one's own awareness by focusing the attention, a form of mind training he'd been experiencing with in solidarity confinement for years. Denier looked the other way when Charlie sold acid to his customers at the Galaxy, but privately argued to the enthusiastic ingenue explorer that psychedelics weren't as effective as mind expansion tool as hypnotism. He encouraged Charlie to borrow rare books on tools as hypnotism for his extensive library. Proclaiming that hypnosis could cure all ills, Denier's zeal of hypnosis took on missionary intensity. Charles' belief that illness was caused by false beliefs and mental constructs found a welcome audience in Denier. But as always, with Charlie, esoteric interest dovetailed with criminal and sexual pursuits. Another bond between Charles and Denier was their mutual criminal record for pimping in the 1950s, a current passion for seducing the young Galaxy gals who stripped at the club. Just as Chuck Sommers was actually Charles Miles Manson, William Denier started out as a U.S. Navy yeoman, Bernie W. Smith. He learned hypnosis in Hawaii while stationed at the Pearl Harbor Naval Base during World War II. In 1956, Smith was charged with white slavery when he supposedly used his hypnotic charms to lure an underage girl into sin in Honolulu, where he operated a successful hypnotism school. More criminal charges followed when Smith was indicted and tried for hypnotizing underage girls to work for him as prostitutes. In the same year, under the name William Denier, he trademarked a curious device called Hypnoid, a technical grooved phonograph recorded designed to induce hypnotism into listeners. The tight ride into Charlie's study of how sound affects consciousness and his obsession with Scientology concept of the tone 40 command, a vocally produced sound wave that allegedly compels compliance to all that hear it. Does this sound like MK? Evidence pressed in Denier's 1956 trial showed that the jailbait hookers he pimped out were still in a trance when interviewed by police. If true, the Denier appears to have been a more successful real-life version of the mesmeric Svengali the mass media only pretended Charlie was. I don't know how much Charlie knew about his friend's shady past, but if anything, these criminal credentials would only have made him trust Denier more. After changing his name to avoid with his criminal record, Denier sought his fortune in fad-crazy Los Angeles. He billed himself as the world's foremost hypnotist, giving lectures nationwide on use of hypnotism in daily life. Author Ed Sanders, while devoting entire irrelevant chapters to the Process Church and other occult outfits Charlie had nothing to do with, only grants Denier a passing sentence or two in The Family. He reported that Charlie tried to sell Denier one of their omnipresent video systems that pop up so often in this case. According to Charlie, Denier's pragmatic self-hypnosis tips gleaned at the Galaxy actually did influence the understanding of the consciousness in a way that the widely pseudo-wisdom of the process never did. Naturally, as you may have guessed, what little was previously known about Charlie's connection to Denier has long led some credent conspiraoids of the May Brussels School to speculate that, this must be one of the sinister government spooks who supposedly taught Manson the secrets of mind control. In that report, it's interesting that Denier told the Kingsport Times News in 1960 that people are not afraid of hypnotism. They're afraid of hypnosis, which will unleash some hidden evil within them. In other words, afraid of the truth. Charlie presented Denier to me as a respected peer, not as a mentor. He said as a Navy yeoman, he served from World War II into the early phase of the Vietnam War as possible that his military hypnosis trained him to be connected to the Oval Office of Intelligence Research into the mysteries of the mind as an espionage weapon. In 1970, rather hilariously considering his previous career as hypnotic horror master, Denier founded the California Professional Hypnotic Association to enforce ethics in the profession. But when his ex-con friend all over the newspapers as a diabolical cult leader who hypnotized girls to kill, Denier probably didn't include the name of Charlie Manson on his resume of people he taught hypnosis. That guy's mind was fast. I liked to rap with him, Charlie said. You know, not many people around me could keep up with me. Bill could. He never did me wrong. I only discovered recently that in 1971, the year Charlie was sentenced to death, Denier appeared at a California school where he hypnotized students on the stage as part of an assembly. The school yearbook documenting Denier's appearance identifies him as having been involved in the Charles Manson murder. Considering Denier's track record of grooming teenage girls as prostitutes via hypnosis and his unmentioned friendship with Charlie, the school tomfoolery is curious to say the least. I have thus far found no proof that Denier had any connection whatsoever to the Tate LaBianca proceedings, so it would be enlightening to know if this false claim portends anything more than a con man's attempt to lend himself some legal legitimacy. I've uncovered more about this fascinating character, but since it brings us far afield from the Manson verse, this will be explored in another medium. However, some extremely pertinent case-relevant information about this important but little-known relationship between Charlie and his mesmeric mentor was vouchsafed to me by Denier's daughter, Robin, that would be sharing in this volume. In 1967, the 10-year-old Robin accompanied her father to the Closely Galaxy nightclub during the daytime. Denier felt that the accounting of the previous night's take. A rather shy, introverted young man arrived with a broom to carry out his humble duty of sweeping the nightclub's floor. The janitor interrupted Denier's counting of cash and receipts to ask if the boss, who he referred to as Bill, would teach him hypnosis. The question he obviously asked many times before, Denier replied, with some irritation, "Not now, just do your job, Charlie." As for Robin Denver, only learned after his arrest 2 years later, the withdrawn floor sweeper was none other than Charlie Manson. In the anecdotes Charlie told me about his visits to Denier at the Galaxy, he never admitted that he was the club's menial employee. Charlie casually mentioned that during his first year out of prison, he picked up a little extra cash carrying out chores as babysitting for the actor Al Lewis's children. We know who that is. But this Galaxy gig was the first I'd heard of him actually submitting to any kind of gainful employment during the early days of his commune. If the notion of nightclub janitor, Charlie seems incongruous with the later cult leader image. Dean Denier also vividly recalled the clean-shaven, conventionally attired unknown Charlie she met at the height of hippiedom was not garbed in his groovy threads, one might imagine. After Charlie left, Denier's daughter was startled by her father's stern admonition, warning her that he'd kick her ass if she ever talked to his employee. How much did Denier know about Chuck Sommers? Less legal business activities? This question must weigh even heavier in our contemplation of the Manson mysteries when we absorb the following never-before revealed data. 2 years after the incident at the Galaxy Club, an understandably agitated Bill Denier told his daughter that homicide detectives visited him to interrogate him about a more recent encounter with the introverted young man with the broom that has never come to light until now. The cops wanted to know from Denier if it was true that one Charlie Manson had stopped by in August of '69 to try to sell him an expensive, high-end, state-of-the-art audio system. Denyer admitted to law enforcement that indeed his former employer, Charlie, had come by with 2 such stereo equipment for sale. Denyer didn't buy the hi-fi sound rig. The detectives informed him that the studio system Charlie offered had been stolen from the Cielo Drive home of Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski, which means that the police and Bugliosi both knew well that the Cielo Drive slaughter was also a robbery, but never admitted the fact to the public. So here we got the police and the district attorney covering up for the murders. Like the Topanga Corral. That's where I went Charlie Manson. I met him at the Topanga Corral. I almost got on stage with my guitar to play with him. And the Hells Angels showed up. They were more like the Satan slaves. I had to leave. Like the Topanga Canyon reference, the minstrel chapter of the Seedy Galaxy was conveniently free of cops and narcs. Charlie's friendship with the boss afforded him carte blanche status. The unpoliced zone also allowed Charlie to engage in the more or less open sales of LSD, grass, and more exotic substances. Among the musicians Charlie socialized with at the Galaxy were Jim Morrison, encountered in the midst of what Charlie called an embarrassing blackout binge, the members of the group Iron Butterfly, whose rented beach home Charlie communed briefly occupied. Iron Butterfly performed 2 weekly residency at the Galaxy, the Inn Spot on the Strip, on the 4th of July, 1967, a few months after Charlie was released from Terminal Island. Of course, it came to the Underworld associates he encountered at these joints. He refused to name names, but he did drop the side of the Galaxy was his favorite watering hole for some press from some chess-playing Italians trying to get it on the drug market, who he claimed were involved in the lead-up to the Cielo Drive mayhem. I mean, just the amount of people involved in this whole thing, the amount of cover-up involved. So I sit here and read this every day. I just get astounded every day. The next chapter is called Rashomon and For Whom the Bell Tolls, the Beach Boys Murders. We have to get into that at another time. I will say thanks to all the vinyl community members. You know what you guys' problem is? You're forget the children, you adults are living in a crime community. The vinyl community is a crime community, is it not? Otherwise, you wouldn't have the word payola in your vocabulary, would you? So when this kind of information gets out, the word needs to be spread because Steve's sitting here speaking the truth. So we pray for all the families and all the community members. Thanks, guys. I know who you all are. They sent me a list of who you guys are. Thank you, guys, for checking me out and saying hi. I appreciate it. I watch your streams once in a while, too.